Today, the story behind one of America's most admired brands and the CEO who felt a fear of failure all along the way. I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health and leadership and work and asks, how can we do it all better? The former CEO of Coach, the handbag and lifestyle brand, a multi-billion-dollar company, Lew Frankfort, helped create a category. We call it accessible luxury, and scaled a very small leather goods company into a cultural and global force. But the story behind Lew's success is powered by something far more human, a lifelong fear of failure. The intersection of fear and doing and achieving. And so today, Lew talks candidly about how the fear has never disappeared, even after taking Coach public, even after building a multi-billion-dollar brand. It showed up in boardrooms and in his dreams. It showed up in anxiety and in depressive episodes. And in our conversation, though, Lew explains how he learned to harness fear instead of letting it freeze him, how he pairs his drive with purpose, and how he meets anxiety with curiosity. Magic and logic is his recipe. And so this simple framework, the way he scheduled his time, the practices that steadied him are really illustrative for all of us who want to lead into great things. And yet we fear failure because maybe we're anxious achievers. Enjoy my conversation with Lew Frankfort. Hi, Lew.
Hello, Morra.
So, Lew, I have so many questions to ask you. First of all, it was really fascinating to go behind the scenes of Coach, such an iconic brand. I didn't realize that you at Coach really coined the term accessible luxury.
That's true. We did.
Such a powerful and meaningful term, I think, for our time. I didn't realize that.
Well, we needed a moniker before Coach went public. We needed a easy way to help investors understand the space that this American handbag company occupied.
Yeah.
Prior to using the term, there was mass and there was luxury, and in the middle was a very small premium section, which Coach was part of. And what we realized was that as a country, we don't have a history of luxury brands. We're really a country of immigrants. And what I thought about that led me to accessible luxury is democratization of luxury, to make luxury available to a large portion of the population. Which we were able to do. We coined the term accessible luxury, and which was a single lane. It was a small area that was occupied, and we and others turned it into a super lane highway somewhere between mass and luxury, recognizing that Americans were looking for great product, high quality, good function at prices that would be reasonable, and products that would endure, that would also have a strong emotional connection to their users. And we already had built a very loyal following, and now we had language to really describe the space we were occupying.
Yes. And to me now, it's hard to imagine that category not existing. The other thing that I thought was super interesting and our younger listeners will find shocking is that you got a lot of pushback from people who said, well, women they need one handbag. Like, why is when you went to investors, who I assume were mostly men, they would say, well, women have a handbag. That's it. And you had to tell them, no, women want handbags. They desire handbags. This is an emotional thing, not just I have a handbag.
Oh, very true. And the way I made it come alive, when I met with investor groups prior to our going public during our roadshow, and even in subsequent conferences and the like, as a warm-up, I might start my presentation by asking a question. I would ask the men in the audience, which usually represented 80% of the people, how many of you are carrying a wallet? And everyone would raise their hand. And then I would say, how many of you know the brand of your wallet? And most people would put their hands down. And in contrast, I would then ask the rest of the audience, the women in the audience, which might be 20% of the people, how many of you have a handbag? Everyone would raise their hand. How many of you know the brand of your handbag? And everyone kept their hand up. And in that moment, I think bells went off for many of the male investors to appreciate that women really valued their bag. It's a very intimate object. They open and close it 50, 60 times a day, at least back in the year 2000, before the digital age allowed you to actually do everything without carrying a bag except carry your other essentials.
I know. It's so interesting to me, as someone who lives immersed in brand culture on Instagram. So, Lew, I want to talk about a couple things today. I really want to center in on your discussion of your own depression and how you manage that. And then I also want to talk a little bit about how you build teams, how you create teams of people who have many idiosyncrasies and yet find a common path. I thought that was really interesting. But I want to start the interview zooming in at the end of your story where you had left Coach. I assume you were worth a good bit of money. You had your own investment company. You invested in brands, and an experience with one of your investments sort of went south. There was trouble with the CEO. Your anxiety spiked. You started to feel depressed. And you write, I began to accept my fears would never disappear. No amount of accomplishment or success would ever heal me. I still felt the drive, failure, excellence connection.
That is true through today.
Hmm. Why?
I think it's the way that I'm wired. And I think many, many people are driven by excellence and at the same time are afraid of failure.
Right.
And I've always been driven by excellence. And on the other hand, a sense that if I did not achieve excellence, I could fail. And that never let me become complacent. Even with considerable success, I always looked ahead and never took success for granted. And part of that is having insatiable curiosity, challenging ourselves to do better, holding antithetical views in your mind at the same time, and recognizing the merit of all of the different views.
So this show is called The Anxious Achiever.
Okay.
That's very much the philosophy and of the, almost 1,000 leaders that I've interviewed. There's a group of us, and we are equally powered by fear and anxiety, as we are sort of held by it. And the way that you put it, the drive, failure, excellence connection. I had never heard that before, but that felt so powerful to me.
Yes, fear alone doesn't work because in fear, any animal, any human or animal, any species, when we talk about fear, there are three choices when you're afraid. You can flee,
Yep.
you can freeze, or you can fight.
Right.
And if you only have fear and not a drive or belief in something different or better, you're not going to be able to fight in the ways that you need to, which is in a consistent, thoughtful, powerful way where you try to rally others in addition to yourself, recognizing that the drive for purpose and to achieve possibilities must outweigh your fears. Otherwise, you're not going to be successful.
So your fear of failure is almost like a character in your book.
Yeah, it lives with me. consciously quite often, and certainly in my dreams virtually every night.
When did you first come to see your fear of failure as sort of an essential piece of yourself?
When I entered new situations, I realized that I needed to learn and I needed to push myself to look at possibilities. And I developed a strong set of investigative skills. And as I said earlier, I just generally am eternally curious. So when I approach a new situation, almost like a blank page, I look to any references that I might have to give me a head start. And if I don't have any, I just start from scratch. And it's through a method of inquiry, it's didactic, it's listening to experts, it's reading, it's trial and error, it's looking at best practices, trying to look at all of the signals that can give you touchstones to help me move ahead in the new world.
I love that. And we know from science that actually curiosity is an antidote to anxiety. But that anxiety can power curiosity. And I think that that's one of the things that you're saying is that you feel the fear of failure, you feel the drive, but you meet that with curiosity.
That's true. I also try to lean into areas of knowledge when I enter a new situation. So, as an example, I was always focused when I was in city government on service. I was a person to provide service to our clients. And in this case, what the case I'm thinking about is daycare and Head Start children's services in New York City. So I felt all of the children and families under our care was my responsibility to do the very best job I could to provide them with the best quality services. And when I went to coach, and I was doing my due diligence during the interview process, I learned from a small retailer on 72nd Street on the west side of Manhattan, who I went in and spoke with. I said I was a Business Week freelance reporter, and I was doing an article on Coach, small brands. And I said, tell me about Coach. And she said to me that it had a cult following. It's small, but people really love their coach. And that sparked curiosity in me. And I wanted to understand, why did people love their coach, that they would come back and buy it again? And she was in a situation where she only had one bag in stock, and it was reserved for a pre-existing coach user below the counter, but she took it out and showed it to me and talked about its attributes.
Right.
Natural leather, excellent construction, highly functional, durable. And all of a sudden, I developed a lot of imagery around what Coach was and what it could also be in the future.
Yeah. Curiosity is amazing. It
I
is.
think we're all curious, and I do think fear can get in the way of expressing your curiosity, as you mentioned.
Yeah. But I think knowing that it's a great technique. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling anxious. I'm going to try to get curious. And sometimes you could get curious about why you're feeling that way. And sometimes you could apply the curiosity to the situation, which is what you did. And sounds like did throughout your career.
Sure.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really interesting is when you talk about a period that you had at Sara Lee, giant conglomerate. It's funny when I think about the conglomerates of the 80s and 90s, right? Sara Lee, they sold everything from pound cake to pantyhose, and at one point owned Coach.
That's true.
Talk a little bit about how you went from being the leader of this small and passionate brand to fitting into a giant conglomerate culture, what you learned, and then why ultimately you left.
Sure. Well, in fact, I recommended to the founder of Coach that he seriously consider selling the business to Sara Lee, which was one of several suitors. After I was at Coach for about 5 years, the founder shared with me that no one in his family, which I already knew, was interested in succeeding him. and that he was going to look to sell the business.
Right.
And at the time,
Which was doing what, like $10 million in revenue at the time?
that
or?
time in 1980, at the end of 84 into 85, we were doing a little bit over $20 million.
20 million, okay.
I joined when it was $6 million. And I had the two businesses I started, which were catalog and stores, led us to be what we called then a multi-channel business. Now they're called omni-channel businesses.
Right.
And my entire thrust was to reduce barriers between coach and the end user. So going direct through a catalog and our own stores was a natural path. So the founder said to me that he was looking to sell the business and wanted me to stay on to help him and a banker to sell the business. And if I stayed on, he wanted me to understand that he would recommend me to be CEO, even though he did not think I was yet qualified. And with that faint-hearted endorsement, the banker and I went out and met with several different companies. What appealed to me about Sara Lee was that it was actually a conglomerate and that there were 100 plus individual companies. It was remote in Chicago headquarters or North Carolina. And if the companies met their plan, they would be left alone largely to develop and run the businesses themselves. And I was really looking to have a level of independence that I thought we would be able to achieve with a conglomerate. I also was attracted to Sara Lee for two other reasons. One is that they were very strongly financially driven, and they believed, as I came to believe, what gets measured is much more likely to get done. What gets measured is more likely to get done. So we developed rigorous plans, and there was a level of accountability that all of us had to meet in each of the divisions. And it really gave me the level of discipline that enabled me to put into place the fundamentals to help coach become a best-in-class business.
Right.
The other aspect of Sara Lee that was intriguing to me was that they were focused, at least in the consumer packaged businesses, in the Hanes and the hosiery and the underwear businesses, in consumer analytics, data analysis. And being a numbers junkie, I always like to understand what people thought about things, what they liked, what they did not like. If they weren't buying Coach, what might they buy? What was their interest in a future purchase and the like. So in my first few years with Sara Lee, it was all about learning. And we thrived in the first several years we were with Sara Lee. As we became bigger and a more significant business, we started to bump against some of the guidelines that all companies had to follow in terms of organizational structure, compensation packages, and the like. And they did not have a business like Coach that truly blended magic and logic, or art and science. And because of the strength of Coach, was interested in me helping other brands by distributing Coach in locations that I felt were not appropriate to the brand image and the alike. And
JCPenney, I think, right?
I'm sorry?
JCPenney.
As a perfect example, they insisted that I open stores in JCPenney shops. And when I looked at the demographics and psychographics of that shopper and the brands that were there, I didn't think that it was an environment that really hit our consumers. And they were also very heavily a discount chain. And Coach worked hard to keep our products in limited quantities to maintain resale price.
So you were promoted sort of out of running Coach into running several portfolio companies at Sara Lee. But at some point, this period became a negative factor. And it sounds like it's when you had sort of your first depression period. Can you talk about that? Can you bring listeners into it? Because it's so helpful for listeners when they can hear someone. I'm sure you were showing up, doing a great job at the top of your game on the outside, but inside, what was happening?
While I maintained responsibilities for coach during the time I was a group officer, most of my time was spent away from coach, leading or overseeing other businesses within the Sara Lee portfolio. And what became increasingly clear to me when I was working with these other leaders is that they were not as open to possibilities as I thought they might be. And I found it really challenging having the level of influence and control that I felt was really needed to drive the businesses to their potential. And as long as they met or beat their plan, they felt from a culture perspective, it was all cool to say, I understand how you feel, Lew, but this is not something I'm prepared to do. And I found myself increasingly frustrated and at the same time ineffective. And I cared deeply. I had belief in possibilities. And when I felt a lack of reception, it was really hard for me. And I started to lose some of my energy and felt that I really needed to start to listen to my body because from the stress I was feeling, it was starting to impact my sleep, as I said, my energy, my mojo. And I felt that I was really failing. And the people I was working with, some were enthusiastic about my leadership, but there are others who were detractors. And in a very large conglomerate, the politics of a culture can often influence outcomes. And the detractors were quite strong, basically suggesting Lew should go back to coach. And I found myself sinking, and I decided that the best thing for my mental health was to remove myself from that situation, even though it would not be the best thing for my career. Simultaneously, I also came to realize that you sometimes have to pursue the wrong destiny to understand your best destiny. And when I had been promoted to a group officer and then a senior group officer, I was playing the game within Sara Lee that I was a candidate to one day potentially be the CEO of this conglomerate. So I needed to step up and show that I could lead leaders of different businesses. And I did not do a good job from Sara Lee's perspective, nor from my perspective. And over time, I returned to coach.
What It's so interesting, and I'm sure there are many benefits of hindsight, but what is it about your makeup that, I mean, I can relate to this, that made you get depressed? I think a lot of personalities would say, "Meh." But the way that I read it in your book is that you really took this personally and you became depressed in this situation. Like, why? What about you made that?
That's a great question. I believe it has to do, of course, with the way I'm made up. I've always led with purpose.
Mm-hmm.
In government, I was in service of lower income families and children to provide educational support services, family support services. And when I went to coach, I felt I was also in service of the consumer, but always with purpose and always with belief. And when I did not feel that I was able to move things forward along lines of belief and purpose, it hit me personally.
Huh. Interesting. You say that was around the time that you started therapy, I think, or was that later?
It was actually later. However, during my Sara Lee days, I did develop a variety of activities to really help me restore strength and maintain it. And I encourage people to do this as part of their daily regimen, even if they're feeling great. And that's exercise, it's meditation, it's massage, it's executive coaching, it's it's therapy as well. So I will say during Sarah Lee years, we used a lot of executive coaches to help ourselves and our teams become more effective leaders, better collaborators, more capable by developing greater insights into who they are, what motivates them, what disturbs them, self regulation, and the alike.
Yeah. Right. So helpful. I want to fast forward because you did successfully sort of free coach from Sarah Lee. You took the company public, which doesn't sound like the easiest way to do it, but I guess that's what you had to do. So Reed Krakoff, he's a very well-known person in our culture if you follow fashion and luxury and lifestyle and all that. And you hired him at Coach when you had taken the company back. What did that sort of combination of your sort of logical, analytical brain and his creative personality, why did that work? And what can people take away from that decision?
I always believed in a blend of magic and logic. Even if we go back 10 years earlier than when Reed joined us, we actually used the term magic and logic. And the reason we use those terms together is because there's magic and logic, and there's logic and magic. And the combination of using rigorous metrics, data analytics, of your curiosity, coupled with imagination, belief in possibilities, creativity can actually, and consumer insights can actually bring you to a much better place than if you work alone in silos.
Yeah.
And so I recruited Reed in a position that had never existed in any of the divisions of Sarah Lee, and that was as a chief creative officer. At the time, most consumer products companies had chief marketing officers. And I was looking to have a partner who would actually lead with creativity and respect the logic both within the creativity as well as outside of the creativity.
What was the insight that led you to think about this position that didn't, now it's every day, but back then didn't really exist? Do you remember what made you think, I need this in my life?
Prior to rejoining Coach, we had a more traditional corporate structure that did include a chief designer, a chief marketing officer, both of which reported to me. When I looked at best in class models of businesses within premier brands, and when I say premier, it could be luxury or accessible luxury brands in Europe in particular, I saw there was a position of chief creative officer that attempted to harness all of the functions that would be consumer facing under one individual. And I saw that as a much better formula for success. And I implored Sarah Lee to let me recruit this person to join Coach at a compensation level at that time equal to mine. And
Which
said,
they didn't like, right? They thought, what? That's ridiculous.
well, they thought it was excessive and they didn't quite understand it. But I think they came to appreciate later on that it was a very good decision on our part.
Yeah. I remember the Coach transformation, as a young woman who followed luxury. And I think that I want listeners to understand just how significant it was. It was a real cultural force when Coach sort of came roaring into the public consciousness of what was really cool and covetable in that period. You do talk about your technique in the book of what you call immersive interviewing and noting that you hired people with all kinds of idiosyncrasies, right? Who had quirks, who, may not even have fit in a more general corporate culture, but you saw them. And one of the things that you said that stuck out to me, and I'd love you to expand on, is you said, because I knew them so well from the interviewing process, when bumps happened along the way, I saw a way to sort of help them out of it, or I could navigate towards their strengths.
That's true, and indeed, starting in the early '90s, I began to utilize executive coaches throughout the entire leadership team at Coach. And when new people join Coach, depending on who the person was and their circumstances, I would frequently ask them to onboard with an executive coach, where I would really be the executive sponsor, and the coach would be working with them in a process to help them become a better version of themselves. But going back to the interviewing process, I remember the term from the 1960s in a book, Stranger in a Strange Land. Robert Heinlein's story about a person who was half Martian and half Earthling, who was able to grok people, GROK. And I recently saw that it's now part of the
Yeah.
global dictionary.
Well, it
And
is. And it's also an Elon Musk AI term that is a fascist site. So, not
I,
maybe a term we want to use as much today.
well, I will say that I used it 40 years.
Exactly.
But the notion was to develop a more intimate understanding of someone than you can typically have from a 1 or 2 hour interview process. So part of my interviewing process, I still use the same process. And basically, I'm looking first, and I'm not going through the 3 stages, but I look for qualities of a person. I start with integrity. I look to work ethic, collaborative skills, positive thinking, belief in possibilities. And the way I would ask people was largely on a numeric scale, where 1 would be the lowest and 10 would be the highest. And I would ask people to rate themselves from 1 to 10. And I would basically look for clusters and outliers. So if someone said, as an example, that integrity, everyone would largely say 9 and 10. If I asked someone collaborative skills, and they might say a 7, and I would say, what would you need to do to be an 8? What would you need to do better? And they would need to convince me ultimately of a development need. They might say, I need to be more patient with people who don't get it as quickly, or I need to be less judgmental. From asking people 60 or 70 different questions with a numeric score, I was able to see clusters as well as outliers. And during that interviewing process, I would really develop a sense of what makes that person tick. I also tried to get a 360 understanding of the person in terms of where their childhood, what the sports they were interested in, their siblings, what they do for free time today. I also ask people where they fit on an extrovert introvert scale. These things are very insightful. So
How did you trust them to tell the truth? A lot of people don't have self-awareness, or they might think, well, I need to impress Lew. Like, how did you trust your data?
Well, as an example, if someone talked a lot and during an interview, when I would get to the 3rd part of the interview, which was that actual screen, one of the questions I would ask on a talkative scale, if someone is taciturn, that's a 1. And if someone is loquacious, that's a 10. Where would you put yourself? And if they were not honest, they might say 6 or 7 when I already made a note that they're a 9 or a 10.
Yeah.
And I might also say, who's someone who knows you well? And they might tell me about a life partner. And I would say, what would your life partner say you are on that scale? And then what would you say that your life partner is? And if you do this across enough dimensions with many different applications of this similar question, you can really get to the essence. So, for example, someone who is extremely talkative generally does not have good listening skills because they're interrupting, they're talking over someone,
Mm-hmm.
or they're thinking about what to say.
Right.
And that's a yellow signal of caution about recruiting someone.
Interesting.
I would
Interesting.
also, if I thought people might have issues with positional authority, legitimate authority, I might ask someone, what's your ability to suffer fools when necessary on a 1 to 10 scale? And I would probe after the number. And I might say, well, in another, when I asked you how you manage up, you said a 10, but now you said to me, you're only a 7. And when I asked you for an example, you said, if I don't respect my boss, it's hard for me to follow him. And there's an apparent inconsistency that I note.
Do you think that your own personality and your own trait of being both very mission driven, driven by values, and driven by a fear of failure caused you to hire certain types that were like you or were different from you?
That's also an intriguing question. I would say different for me. I always looked to complement myself with others. And one of the things I learned from Sarah Lee, they had a highly dysfunctional board, which is the case with many, many large companies. And when I say dysfunctional, what I mean is the people on the board are not willing to speak truth to power. And they also understand that the reason they're on a board is because they're not speaking truth to power. And when I had the opportunity to develop my own board after Coach became public, I recruited individuals who not only had complementary skills to mine, but were also independent. And I had a keen interest in only recruiting board members who would be respected by my senior leadership team.
Mm.
And I had a policy that anyone on my board could talk to anyone at Coach without talking to me about it or without me being aware before or afterwards. And the reason for that was I wanted to encourage both my leadership team as well as my board members to express themselves and lean in and learn as much. I understand that's not a practice that's widely held, but I will say we had an incredible board and investment grade team after we took Coach public during that glorious decade plus when Coach went from 500 million to $5 billion. And it took a real strong team. It takes a village to make this happen.
Absolutely. During that decade, did you still have nightmares?
Absolutely. And I mean, when we say nightmares, they're dreams where I wake up in the sweat and my t-shirt or whatever, I'm really soaked of the sheets and the pillowcases. Very common, even though many people may not share that. The dreams actually were a function of me not being prepared or something happening to me of real negative consequence that I had little control over.
Yeah. When you felt out of control.
Yes. And I will say that when I have depressive episodes, they generally occur in a situation where I have limited control, or I believe I have limited control. That's very important to me. And I can see a movie coming in front of me that does not have a happy ending, and it really impacts me very, very heavily. And what I learned over the years is to try to anticipate those situations and avoid them if you can.
How do you avoid them, though? I mean, running a multi-billion dollar business, there's so much that's out of your control. I mean,
Yes, but there's also a lot within your control, and focusing on what might be on within your control. Also, through pattern recognition,
mm,
trying to avoid getting into situations where you believe there's going to be a high likelihood of it, not a good outcome.
right, right. So actually, that leads me to my last question, which is, I think may not feel obvious, but it was interesting to me. Knowing that you're someone who likes to feel like they're in control and that feeling out of control can trigger your mental health challenges, I thought it was interesting. You said that when you were CEO, you approached time management in sort of three buckets. You had building for the future time, you had covering bases time,
Yes.
and you had firefighting time. How did this shake out, and why did it help you, and maybe broaden this to advice for leaders listening? Why did this help you feel more balanced and maybe more like you had a locus of control?
When it comes to breaking down the workday or where you spend your time, I introduced that concept for my teams because I felt it was really important as businesses grow for leaders to be extremely conscious of where do they lean in and how do they lean in. And very typically in early stage businesses, leaders need to do almost everything. And then as you build teams, hopefully you bring in the type of people that allow you to really function more on building for the future. And I would challenge my team frequently if I felt they were spending too much time firefighting and weren't really organized to even cover the bases because they were putting wildfires, or they were covering the bases but did not have enough time to dream and imagine and vision and plan for the future. And over time, it became a very handy way for me to look at how I spend my time and others. And I believe leaders need to spend maybe 50% of their time covering the bases, 30 to 40% of the time building for the future, and the remaining 10 to 20% on emergencies.
Sounds great.
It, it's largely worked.
My last question is really, if people who listen to the show are ambitious people who actively manage their mental health. When you look back at your many, many years of success in leadership, is there something that you wish you had worried about less?
I think not, but what I do think is that I would have sought out therapy, mental health practitioners earlier in my life,
Mhm.
including the use of medication during depressive periods, which in my case and most people I know, it not only is a helpful coping mechanism, but it doesn't really properly administered with the right type of therapy. It does not really reduce your highs, but it manages your lows. And I do believe promoting your own mental health and mental health of everyone within your community, family, church, workplace is really key to healthy and happy living.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lew.
Well, thank you. It's been a joy being with you.